The past is a foreign country. The further you are from it, the more alien it seems when compared to the present. Not only does society shift and change, but your perspective on matters can drastically alter as well. What seems like an eternal monolith one day could crumble to dust given enough effort, and one small act can domino into a revolution. And we, as fixed observers of this ever-changing world, are not only the ones able to reflect on all that's changed, but also the ones who can shape it. Time is an ocean in a storm, an endless sea of sand shifting with the whims of fate. Sand that buries entire civilizations and schools of thought beneath its uncaring dunes, never to be unearthed, but always remembered. So anyway, Prince of Persia is a video game, specifically a video game from 1989 by Mr. Jordan Mechner, originally for the Apple II computer, plus a war elephant's worth of official and unofficial ports. There's just so many. It saw the player taking control of a nameless protagonist as he traversed deadly environments in pursuit of an evil vizier under a strict 1-hour time limit. For its time, the original Prince of Persia was a truly impressive title with smooth, rotoscoped animations, many critics considered a landmark for the medium, and exciting environmental traversal. Its slow burn success eventually led to it selling 2 million copies by the sequel's release, and the entire genre of cinematic platformers was pushed further by its innovations. Titles like Delphine Software's Another World and Flashback are prime examples, but other works like the Oddworld series and Tomb Raider owe so much of their design and inspiration to Prince of Persia. The slow, deliberate pace and constant danger presented by enemies and surroundings is a trademark of cinematic platformers, leading to a more distinct feel and ethos compared to most puzzle platformers. And while Prince of Persia didn't start the subgenre, it was so well received and impressive it was regarded as one of the greatest PC games available for its time. Travel about 14 years east, Mr. Mechner is brought on by Ubisoft to create a brand new iteration of his beloved opus for the then modern audience of the early 2000s. The best period of gaming, I'm sure we'll all agree. This game would take the general idea of a nameless prince navigating a treacherous castle, but update it to be a more substantial experience. Something more to the taste of an audience who likely had no idea it was even an adaptation of something from the 8-bit era. The end result, Sands of Time, went on to become one of the most critically acclaimed series to spawn from the 6th generation of consoles, with Sands and its sequels selling millions of copies across all platforms, earning awards left and right, and creating enough public interest to keep the series going to this very day. It hasn't always been consistently supported, what with Ubisoft churning out Assassin's Creed games and their 4,000 derivatives year upon year. This month they're giving a complete release to the Rogue Prince of Persia, a strange little title that's been in early access on Steam for a good while. And last year they put out The Lost Crown, a Metroidvania or search action or whatever you want to call the game that constantly requires double jumping without giving it to you for half the runtime. Just like its forebearers, it received critical acclaim and won multiple awards, selling over 1 million units and proving there is indeed a substantial audience, before Ubisoft canceled the sequel, disbanded the team behind it, and sent them off to work on more stupid, repetitive Assassin's Creed games. AAA games, am I right? But then, the past is a foreign country. Maybe that's why the remake has taken so long, their flight keeps getting held up. So in the meantime, let's take a glimpse at the gaming landscape 20 years ago, when the darkness believed in a thing called love, Teen Titans was giving every kid a thing for goth girls, and Prince of Persia Sands of Time was a headliner for the entire hobby of gaming. Now, where shall I begin? At the beginning? Not quite. You fool! Sands of Time, taking appropriate inspiration from the classic folktale collection 1001 Nights, frames its narrative as the prince relating its story to someone else. Everything we experience in the game has effectively happened already, with the story looping back in on itself near the end as we learn who his audience is. This is just one of several measures the developers take to elevate the story beyond what's needed for it to just work. Does the prince strictly need to deliver the occasional voiceover for the plot? Not at all. It would work perfectly fine without that aspect. Just like how a volume of manga would work without a cover, a cake would work without frosting, or a jazz song would work without drums. Functional, but lacking that special something to pull it all together. The prince doesn't even interject that often, usually just a few lines to fill us in on what he was feeling at the time and what he knows now that he's had time to reflect on his actions. Without these few lines, not only would the story have less of its unique fable-like feel, but the prince would come across as much less likable. We, as viewers, can tell his mindset has changed from the time we're playing through. His inflections and dialogue make it obvious the events we're about to see have fundamentally changed him as a person. The prince begins his story in the middle of a pitched battle alongside his father Shahraman, wrecking the castle of a nearby Maharaja on their way to visit the Sultan of Azad. He hears of a sacred treasure from the same vizier who talked them into this battle in the first place, totally not suspicious at all, and storms off to find it. This is the prince, a hot-headed, short-sighted, insecure young man focused solely on gaining glory in battle and impressing his father. Let's not mince words, the prince is a and thoroughly unlikable in oh so many ways. He's cocky, selfish, dismissive, misogynistic, the exact kind of person you expect one to be who's never wanted for anything. The entire reason the Sands of Time are released shortly after they reach the Sultan is because that same gosh darn vizier tricks him into doing so. The prince stole an object called the Dagger of Time with no idea what it was even for, and he doesn't want to give it up, so he's taunted and manipulated into unleashing the Sands. And just like anything that can be described as being unleashed, bad stuff happens. Everyone else in the palace is consumed by the sands because it's coarse and rough and gets everywhere, leaving the prince to set off on his journey and fix his mistake while overcoming his flaws. And in case I didn't make it clear enough, the prince has a lot of flaws, which is what makes him such a good character. He starts out as an annoying, spoiled kid who's never heard no from anyone, royalty through and through, and he acts indeed like the world has been served to him on a silver platter, which it probably was since ancient Persia had a bunch of silver mines. Being put in control of a deliberately unlikable character is something we don't see in games much, whether now or back in the early 2000s. That's probably because most game stories don't focus on a significant internal arc for their protagonist and choose to focus on external struggles due to being easier to see, I guess. Trailer footage. Solid Snake, pretty good guy. Alucard, a bit pessimistic, but he's alright. Sora literally hangs out with Winnie the Pooh. The prince talks to himself about subjugating the one person who's helping him.
I'll meet you at the baths. She orders me around as if I were a servant. It's my own fault. With women, you need to show them you're in charge right from the start, or they'll walk all over you. I've been too indulgent. Probably because I felt sorry for her. Well, it stops now. From now on, she'll have to toe the line.
My dude, bro, home slice. Please stop trying to invent Reddit. It feels like when we do get unlikable main characters to play as, the entire point of their character is to be jerks and remain so, or the writers didn't think people would hate them, or they were trying way too hard to be snarky, which I'm blaming on Joss Whedon, and you can't stop me. And it makes sense, no one wants to be placed in the shoes of someone rude or spiteful, but the great thing about the prince is not only how it makes sense for him to act in such a way, but how he evolves and learns over the course of the story, which incorporates back into the narration since he comments on how childishly he acted during the events of the game. It also keeps in line with the lighthearted air of fables and folklore, since those stories often involve some kind of moral lesson for the reader. We rarely see this kind of clever narrative design in games anymore, especially in the AAA sector where Sands of Time was once created. There's a better chance of finding it in indie games, but the kinds of studios who used to make projects like Sands of Time are no longer willing to try this approach to storytelling, and it's just such a loss. Am I saying video games stopped having good narratives or storytelling after 2003? No. I mean, The World Ends With You didn't even come out until 2007, and everyone should have immediately stopped trying right there. But in any medium where most of the public consciousness is taken up by the big budget, giant scale, mainstream showcase businesses, the ones speaking the loudest have gotten less and less to say. When there's so much money to be made and so many shareholders to placate and so many fingers and so many pies, creators don't get the freedom to try these wonderful framing devices or impart more significant morals onto those experiencing them than don't be a bad person, or stand up to evil, or don't be a Nazi, you stupid morons. As the amount of money in the industry has exploded over the past few console generations, stories have become more rigid, more plain, more standardized in relation to the perceived common audience for games, aka Lots of hairy dads and their kids or kid equivalents. The thing is, if I break down the morals and the message behind Sands of Time, it wouldn't sound much more complicated than the ones I'm criticizing. But the difference is how intimate a character study the whole narrative feels. This is a story of a privileged man riddled with insecurities because of his position in life and learning to overcome his personal issues while in the midst of a disaster he caused himself. The prince, through his interactions with another survivor and the efforts of correcting his mistake, learns humility and self-actualization. He doesn't just stop the bad guy, he becomes a good person. This other survivor is Farah, the prince's polar opposite and love interest. Why do I keep making videos on games with a focus on romance? I should check my Oh. She's the daughter of the Maharaja they just invaded and was taken as a prisoner to be given to the Sultan. Despite being in a similarly privileged position as the prince, she's much more book smart and sheltered to contrast his practicality and battle experience. She can fire off a bow, even hit you by mistake, which is cute, but clearly isn't able to get through the palace working on her own, and the prince can't get through without her. Farah is intelligent and capable enough, but the situation they're stuck in requires a skill set she doesn't have, which is where the prince comes in, and vice versa. They complement each other, but clearly didn't meet on the best of terms. So it's just so dramatic. It's just a big, juicy cantaloupe. I don't know. Again, the prince even complains about Farah having opinions and personality, but they slowly start enjoying one another's company. They banter and bicker when they're together, and the relationship does feel a bit unexplored because the game's kind of short, but its place and significance within the story is what makes it so great even today. Two people who want less than nothing to do with each other, with their own warped ideas as to what romance is supposed to be like because of their upbringing and the context of the time period, but their time together makes them both better rounded. In short, they complete each other. They care for each other, and not only does it add to their individual growth as characters, it adds weight to the events of the journey. Bit by bit, the prince realizes his privilege is ultimately gold plating over a crumbling wall, and by the end, he's left wiser for gaining something truly precious in a genuine connection he shares with Farah. It's even shown in his character model as his fancy shirt gets ripped up until he's shirtless like on the cover. His walls are finally down, and he realizes his feelings for another person completely detached from his position as royalty. So when a sand vision shows Farah betraying him by stealing the dagger of time, his walls go back up. Look at his face! He seems genuinely hurt by how Farah is gonna turn on him. And it means something because their relationship has been so integral to the overall story. Like, no, Prince, you were doing so well. She read you poetry in the library, let you rest on her lap when you passed out from sand visions, got to look at you shirtless. It just evokes the kind of emotions I don't feel for video game protagonists very often because they really let you understand who the prince is and what this kind of relationship would mean to him without unnecessary exposition. Now, I suppose I've gotten a bit ahead of myself. Much of what I've said happens later in the game, not something I need to go over now. Apologies, let me go back a bit. The prince begins his story in the middle of a pitched battle alongside his father Shahraman, wrecking the castle of a nearby Maharaja on their way to visit the Sultan of Azad. He hears of a sacred treasure from the same vizier who talked them into this battle in the first place, totally not suspicious at all, and storms off to find it. Within a few moments, you're given control and go through tutorials for everything the prince can do. Similar to games like Tomb Raider, which had been improving mobility through each entry, the prince's moveset was actually a major talking point in contemporary reviews. Sands of Time, much like the original PC games, places a heavy emphasis on acrobatics and movement. The game is rather harshly split between two sections, puzzle platforming and combat arenas, tackled one after the other. I suppose it would be more accurate to say you have a bunch of puzzle platforming sections harshly interrupted by combat arenas, but we'll get to that later. Now, the combat of jumping around to solve environmental obstacles wasn't anything new by 2003. You had the aforementioned Tomb Raider games by this point, but Sands of Time approached it in a slightly different way. Again, like the cinematic platformers of old, the prince was portrayed as being acrobatic, but within the believable limits of a regular person. Nobody can actually do a double jump or land pinpoint on a flagpole, but running on a wall, shimmying along edges, flinging off horizontal poles, that's much more reasonable. Parkour was already a known practice, traveling from one point to another as quickly as possible without assistance. Turning a cinematic platformer known for fluid animations into a 3D space meant they had more opportunities to show off new tech. So the developers took advantage of it by making the Prince a possibly perfect parkour practitioner. I'm glad I have a pop filter. Only a handful of moves, to be fair. You have the wall run and jump, the ledge shimmy, pillar climbing and jumping, and swinging off poles. Movement like this wouldn't seem too out of place in a modern game, but back in 2003, it was mind-blowing. Heck, even going into the 7th generation and beyond, most protagonists didn't have that kind of mobility. Even Assassin's Creed. It's odd, isn't it? Make no mistake, the Prince's parkour abilities facilitate some of the most fun sections of the game and a wonderful evolution of the classic titles. What starts as a simple wall run here or a pillar climb there turns into a chain of moves so fluid and intuitive, it practically shifts your view of the environment. You start glancing around for ledges just short enough to climb and reach a better vantage, visualizing the connecting motions between two obstacles, looking for tells in the environment, just whispering, "Psst, psst, buddy. Go this way." I remember hearing a bunch of people praise Marvel, Steve Ditko, Sony's, Insomniac's PS4 Spider-Man for how much it made them feel like the titular character, but immersive movement doesn't always have to be flashy. The Prince's moves aren't just ahead of their time in terms of what you could do, but also in terms of just how it feels to control him. The rate he runs along the wall, the weight he has when jumping from point to point. It really does feel like they took the same approach as the old platformers and translated the same ethos into 3D. And just like the old game, Sands of Time is riddled with death traps, spikes, saw blades, bottomless pits, the floor, the whole smorgasbord of 9th century Persian home security. Fortunately, if you're caught up in any of them, you have the titular Sands of Time to fix it. Just hold down a button and you can rewind the past however long this little meter affords. Plus, you can extend your number of rewinds by finding these little sand geysers, which give off a faint hum and restore your sand entirely when you locate them. So you're given incentive to look around these carefully made environments for things that let you make more mistakes, which means you have more leeway to mess around with the Prince's moves, which means you might stumble across more of those geysers. It's all connected. I'm not crazy, you're crazy. This game's design is just so sharp and clean. It's like an expertly forged Damascus knife, the condensed expertise of its creators on full display as it slides past your rib cage. There's something about this specific era of game design where the point wasn't to make the biggest, most feature bloated thing possible that'll take up all the players' time and money, but to focus on doing like one or two things really well and selling it on the promise of doing those two things really, really well. There's no leveling system or weapon customization or open world, just the game repeatedly asking you to solve the next puzzle it puts in front of you. Not everything shines. I think the rope swinging could have had another good room or two, but they only have them in the sewers. But I could also say they don't overstay their welcome. Nothing in Sands of Time feels extraneous or excessive. It's a jigsaw puzzle where everything fits exactly where it needs to. It's a 4-course meal that leaves you satisfied but not overly full. It's a manga that has just enough volumes that you want to read it again, but you'd be fine giving it to someone else to enjoy. It's Ouran High School Host Club. It even has the shirtless guy and everything. The designers balanced around doing a few specific things as opposed to the nightmare they probably have to deal with nowadays when character abilities are either basically useless or too varied to properly balance, and there's like dozens of them. I kind of want to see that on the back of a box. Focused abilities, no feature bloat. Do they even use that as a bullet point on the back of boxes anymore? Do they even list features on the back of the box? Do they still have boxes? Sands of Time has a box and the features on the back are still written from the Prince's perspective. That's cute. Let's see. Mine is a fight for survival, not glory. Alright, pretty intense. Explore and survive the vast kingdoms of medieval Persia. Well, you get to explore one castle, so that's a bit of a stretch. Master the Prince's speed, agility, and ferocious fighting skills. Ah, yes. Fighting. I mentioned that at some point long ago. What a lovely time that was talking about parkour. If there's one iffy point in Sands of Time I always hear people bring up, it's the combat, which isn't awful, but it doesn't feel as polished as the parkour and puzzles. The platforming is fluid and swift, and the combat is clunky and a bit awkward. You have a basic combo by mashing square, attack with the dagger of time using triangle, a block button. That that's about it. I mean, you have a few cool tricks, like using the dagger to turn enemies into sand for easy takedowns, or vaulting over opponents to slash them in the back. That was neat for like a couple minutes, but pretty much every enemy is taken down the same way. Smash the square button when you get the chance, smack them onto the floor, stab them with the dagger, rinse and repeat until the room's cleared. It's something that feels purely functional, maybe a little bit exciting at times, but fights can get just so tedious after a while. Unlike the platforming, they always seem to overstay their welcome by 1 or 2 waves, and they just don't change enough, whereas the platforming is always changing. I clear everything on the screen, but that shot of the prince putting his weapons away doesn't happen, and I just think, another wave? I was like a reluctant surfer who just wanted to go home. It's something I didn't look forward to engaging with, since it felt like the gears of this smoothly operating machine just grinded to a halt for a few moments to work out a spanner. The Mega Freeze move is cool, even if going after those geysers makes it actively harder to pull off, and being able to utilize the wall running is neat, kind of, but I don't know. It just feels like any part of the design should have been more than it strictly needed to be. It was this. But then I have to wonder if people felt the same in 2003, or if I'm just viewing it from the perspective of someone playing this for the first time in the current year. From what I've heard of the sequels, they did improve the combat, so maybe it was a common criticism back then. What else did they put on the back of the box? Let's see, controlling time, treacherous brazier, yeah, no big deal. Actual screenshot. That's a bit unusual. You know what? I want to check something. Let me go back a bit. The prince begins his story in the middle of a pitched battle alongside his father Shahraman, wrecking the castle of a nearby Maharaja on their way to visit the Sultan of Azad. He hears of a sacred treasure from the same vizier who talked them into this battle in the first place, totally not suspicious at all, and storms off to find it. Right away, this warfare scene is very impressive for the time. Dust being kicked up from explosives, well-textured stone fragments, this gorgeous bloom of light over the castle wall. It's quite pretty for 2003, and for a bunch of people, you know, getting murdered. The game even supports progressive scan, which is pretty cool to see from its era. Wait. Bratty man-child learning to actually tackle his insecurities like misogyny and self-entitlement? A female lead who isn't just there to be token eye candy? Progressive scan? Nope, I can't think of a joke here. These environments and skyboxes are genuinely really pretty to look at. It provides for a fantastic atmosphere while exploring, and because of how striking some overall color schemes are, it keeps things fresh when you find a new place. It starts in a beige and ivory battle scene, then a few castle rooms decorated with red cloth. The zoo area has a lot more vegetation, so green is its color, and so on. It gives each section a different feel as you're going through the castle. Every location just has such a strong sense of place, like the prison. It's grimy and rusted, and there's a river of blood running under the floor. Okay, that's pretty metal. Rusty metal. This whole wing has tetanus. I can only imagine how mind-blowing some of these scenes were on release, just seeing all the love and care placed into locations you'll only visit once. I wanted to go back to the reservoir or waterfall because I love the chill blues covering them, but I can't. And it's kind of wonderful for that. You know what else is wonderful? The fact the prince is being voiced by the one, the only, Captain Ressortiment, Yuri Lowenthal. Heck yeah, always nice to hear him. And he's almost the only person you hear, since the voice cast is 5 people. There's the prince, Farah, the vizier, and 2 people who die almost right away. Farah's the only one who also gets a fair amount of lines, and her voice actress, Joanna YIIK, never did any other voice acting. Her only other role in anything I could find was a bit part in some random movie 2 years earlier. I don't know. I find that interesting because she did a good job, and it's just strange and kind of a shame that this was her only role. I'm sure it would be even better if I could hear them most of the time. Visuals, great. Character models, pretty solid. Animations, wonderful. Enemy models, bit limited, but overall pretty good. Audio balancing? Eesh. Voice volumes change from scene to gameplay, and even within the same scene.
She said my love. I know she did. I didn't dream it. At least, I think I didn't. It's quite natural, really. Her kingdom's conquered, she has nothing, no one to protect her. She needs me.
I can barely hear the voice lines in the pre-rendered cutscenes. Some of the music gets super drowned out, the item breaking sound effect is really abrasive, and the banshee screams some enemies let out are just the worst. I find this really fascinating because, much like the combat, it's an awkwardly unpolished aspect in this otherwise very well-crafted experience. I don't know if it's because I'm playing the PS2 version, it's just the one I have. Maybe that's also why the frame rate can be a little skittish at times. People who have played other versions, comment below, let me know if it's the same. I do like the music though, it does a lot for the atmosphere, makes it feel more like an old swashbuckler movie. But the best part in the game is when there's no music. Towards the very end of the game, you have a lengthy section where the prince is climbing up the final tower. Farah has stolen the dagger and headed to the hourglass on her own. Prince retrieves his sword, and it feels like everything's just gone. I look at the setting sun and the harsh shadows on the crumbling buildings, and it achieves something I rarely get to experience in modern games: melancholy. Just the whistle of the wind, crumbling ledges, the prince's shoes scraping against walls as he leaps his way to the top. I miss when games, or any piece of media really, let people experience this kind of atmosphere. It's a big reason as to why my favorite Atelier game of all time is Aisha. The whole aesthetic and tone of the world puts me in this softly sad headspace I find really rare and appealing. Am I emo? Maybe, but that's beside the point. This final climb is wondrous and by far my favorite moment in the entire game. It epitomizes what I mean when I say games like this wouldn't be made today. I'm not saying Sands of Time is better than every single game that came out afterwards. It definitely has issues that have become exasperated as technology and design progresses. We can make games bigger, fancier, more fluid, more expansive. But it feels like the focus on doing all that takes away from moments like this final climb. It isn't that Sands of Time feels more special than modern games or anything like that. It's still a big, fancy AAA game by a major company. I just find it morbidly fascinating how at one point, that's exactly what it was. It was a big, fancy, expensive headliner for the whole industry and hobby of video games. That's one of the biggest reasons I like playing games from this gen so much, or even older titles, and seeing just how far things have come in a relatively short amount of time. Nowadays that audio balancing thing I talked about wouldn't be in the game, the combat wouldn't be as clunky, the frame rate would be stable, and none of that matters because they wouldn't bother making this game in the first place. Heck, Assassin's Creed started as a supposed evolution of Prince of Persia, and it's nearly 20 years old. By this point in time, it's almost a monolith of everything people hate about the very same field that once made these kinds of experiences, and it spawned from a linear puzzle platformer action game about the shared growth of two equally but differently naive people of royalty. I just find that intriguing and not a little bit sad. Speaking of which, that final climb led up to the hourglass where the prince meets back up with Farah. Sadly, she's knocked onto the edge of the platform and it barely hangs on, and the prince tries saving her by holding the dagger. The object that caused all of this, the prize he recklessly sought out at the beginning of the game, and now it's the thing carving into his hand as his love lets go and falls to her death. How poetic, how tragic. How is that stupid vizier still here? Well, Mr. What is your name? It's literally just Vizier. Dang, dress for the job you want, he was named for it. Anyway, the prince plunges the dagger into the hourglass and rewinds before the entire game even happens. Now, back before his father attacks the Maharaja, he goes over to Farah's room and tells her everything that happened. That now hasn't happened, so that none of it will happen. Which also goes back full circle to the whole storytelling angle, since we now know his audience is Farah. Just so clever. He defeats the vizier before he can convince the king to attack and gives Farah the dagger after stealing a kiss and being rebuked because their relationship never happened now. So he rewinds one last time and departs, saying something only he would know so she knows his story is true. It's a very bittersweet ending that encapsulates the prince's arc. He started as a selfish, egocentric young man riddled with insecurities and ended it by giving up the relationship he built and valued when he lost everything. His love is gone, but he knows it never happened now, and he doesn't have any claim to it. It's heartbreaking in a way, but oh so satisfying. If time is an ocean in a storm, then everything people create is a drop of rain. It adds to the overall, but it's tossed and thrashed and chaotic to the point where one person could never hear about something that's changed another person's life for the better and vice versa. But each drop is its own unique thing, and it's harder to appreciate when it's just one drop in a constantly chaotic sea. In the age we live in, it can be extremely overwhelming to not only look at the sheer volume of things created by others and want to experience them, but also contribute your own projects and passion. Each video, drawing, or story I make is adding to that writhing ocean, and I can only hope it reaches someone at the end of the day. While it might be unlikely to reach others, they're still worth existing because they're what I made during a specific moment in time with my own thoughts and skills at the moment. When I go back to Sands of Time, I can't help but think of the people making it, how through chaos or deliberacy, they were brought together and managed to create something that wouldn't be the same if it was made under any other circumstances. Just like how the original Prince of Persia couldn't have been made without Jordan Mechner and his abilities at the time. Sands of Time wouldn't be made today because not only has the industry drastically changed in terms of what the big studios want to fund or make anymore, but even if it was made today, it wouldn't be the game we actually have from 2003. I think a lot about things like the ship of Theseus and whether or not something counts as a new object because you replace a certain amount of parts. Would Sands of Time be the same without the writers, animators, and countless others who worked on the team? No, because it, like many other projects, is a result of chaos. The end result is fantastic, but we can't recreate the circumstances that made it so, no matter how many times we flip the hourglass, because, at least for us, time is not experienced as an ocean in a storm. It's a river. We're always going forward, and while we can't fight against the current, we can always look back at where we once were, and hope for where we're going. Oh dear.